The diner buzzes with morning activity, clinking glasses, the soft murmur of conversations, and the occasional sizzle from the kitchen. In a corner booth, a military veteran quietly sips her coffee, her weathered suitcase resting beside her. Everything about her demeanor suggests she's just another customer passing through. But not for long. The waitress freezes mid-step, her eyes locked on the suitcase. Something about it unnerves her. She glances toward the manager, who nods solemnly, as if giving silent permission for what happens next. "I'm sorry," the waitress says, her voice trembling as she approaches the veteran's table. "But we can't serve you." The veteran looks up, stunned. "What did you just say?" The waitress's hands clutch her notepad tightly. "I need to ask what's in your bag." The entire diner falls silent. Eyes dart toward the confrontation. Whispers begin to... The veteran, calm yet visibly wounded, pushes back her chair and stands. "Is this how you treat someone who's fought for this country?" The tension thickens like a storm cloud, and the manager steps forward. "We'll need to call the police if you don't cooperate." The sirens that follow will mark the beginning of a chain of events that no one could have predicted. The time is always right to do what is right. Martin Luther King Jr. The streets of Portland awaken under a shroud of early morning mist, each cobblestone road glistening from the night's damp air. Vendors shuffle under flickering streetlights, setting up fruit stands and flower carts. The aroma of roasting coffee mingles with the city's chill, promising another brisk, busy day. Evelyn Reid stands on the corner of Oak and Hawthorne, a worn suitcase at her feet. The suitcase, a relic of her years abroad, shows every crease and scratch of its journey. Evelyn's stance is rigid, her eyes fixed on the sign hanging above the diner, Sunrise Diner, home of Portland's best breakfast. She inhales deeply. The air is crisp, biting at her cheeks, but it's the internal chill she can't shake. This isn't the Portland she remembers from her childhood. It feels smaller, colder, and filled with ghosts of who she used to be. Home, she thinks bitterly. Isn't it supposed to feel familiar? Evelyn's boots crunch on the gravel as she steps forward, her movements deliberate. Inside, warmth spills from the diner, along with the heady aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon. Evelyn's sharp eyes dart around as she enters. The room is bright and bustling, patrons in cozy booths, the clink of silverware, the hum of conversation. She feels the hum like static in her chest. Her boots echo on the linoleum as she makes her way to an empty table by the window. She sets her suitcase carefully beside her chair and sits. For a moment, she simply stares out the window, watching the world go by. Across the room, Margaret Delaney notices Evelyn almost immediately. Margaret, a young waitress with a hopeful yet wary expression, is clearing plates from a table when her gaze locks onto the suitcase. Her brow furrows. The suitcase reminds her of an incident last month, a man with a similar bag that caused chaos when it was left unattended. Margaret brushes her hands on her apron and mutters to herself, "Not again." Margaret approaches Evelyn with a notepad in hand, her steps tentative. "Good morning," she says with forced cheerfulness. "Can I get you started with coffee or tea?" Evelyn looks up from the menu, her eyes steady. "Coffee, black, and the pancake special." Margaret jots down the order, but her attention lingers on the suitcase. She hesitates, then blurts, "Are you traveling?" Evelyn's brow arches. "Just got back," she replies curtly, not elaborating. Margaret's unease grows. Her manager's words from last month replay in her head. "Be vigilant. If you see something suspicious, act immediately." She returns to the kitchen, where Daniel, the cook, notices her agitation. "What's up, Mags?" he asks, flipping a pancake. Margaret leans in, lowering her voice. "There's a woman at table 6. She's got this suitcase." Daniel smirks. "You mean luggage? Scandalous." "No, it's just like the one that guy had last time," Margaret insists. "You remember, the one with the fake bomb scare?" Daniel peeks through the kitchen window. "She doesn't look dangerous. Relax." Margaret gnaws on her lip. Mason needs to know. If you're interested, don't forget to subscribe and like it. Mason, the diner's manager, steps out from the back office. He's a middle-aged man with a weary face and a clipboard permanently attached to his hand. Margaret intercepts him, whispering her concerns. Mason's face tightens. "You think she's suspicious because she has a bag?" Mason asks, exasperated. Margaret fidgets. "It's not just the bag. I don't know. Something feels off." Mason glances toward Evelyn's table. Her sharp posture and stoic demeanor stand out among the chatter and casual chaos of the diner. He sighs. We can't afford another fiasco. Just ask her what's inside. Margaret pales. And if I'm wrong? Then apologize. But if you're right. Margaret doesn't wait for him to finish. With a knot in her stomach, she approaches Evelyn again, her notepad clutched like a shield. I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am. Margaret begins, her voice trembling. But what's in your bag? Evelyn freezes. Slowly, she sets down her coffee and looks up. Excuse me? Margaret hesitates. It's just protocol. We've had incidents, and we need to make sure everything's safe. Evelyn's jaw tightens. You mean you need to make sure I'm safe? Margaret steps back, unnerved by the edge in Evelyn's voice. It's not personal. Evelyn leans forward, her eyes narrowing. Isn't it? The tension in the diner is palpable. Conversations falter as other patrons notice the exchange. Evelyn's voice, though calm, carries a dangerous edge. I've served this country for 10 years, she says, her words clipped. And now I can't even have breakfast without being treated like a suspect? Mason steps in, his tone placating. Ma'am, we're just trying to keep everyone safe. If you could cooperate. Evelyn stands abruptly, her military bearing unmistakable. Cooperate? I'm a customer, not a criminal. But fine, go ahead, call the cops. Margaret's face drains of color. Mason hesitates, torn between diffusing the situation and escalating it. Finally, he nods to another staff member, who disappears into the kitchen to make the call. Minutes later, the piercing wail of sirens fills the air. 2 officers step into the diner, their uniforms crisp and their expressions unreadable. Officer Bradley, tall and imposing, scans the room. His partner, Officer Reyes, stands slightly behind him, her hand resting lightly on her holster. Ma'am, Bradley addresses Evelyn, his tone measured. We received a call about a suspicious item. We'll need to check your bag. Evelyn crosses her arms. Do you ask everyone here to open their bags, or just the ones who don't fit the mold? Bradley's composure flickers. This isn't about profiling, ma'am. It's procedure. Evelyn exhales sharply. With deliberate slowness, she unzips the suitcase and opens it. Inside are neatly folded clothes, a worn toiletry kit, and a framed photograph. She holds up the photo, her hands steady. This is who I am, she says, her voice unwavering. The photo shows Evelyn in uniform, standing with her unit in the desert. Dust and exhaustion mark their faces, but their pride is evident. I've given everything for this country, and this is how I'm treated. The photograph in Evelyn's hand feels like a quiet thunderclap. For a moment, no one speaks. The 2 officers exchange glances, their postures softening, but the weight of what just unfolded keeps them frozen. Margaret's trembling hands clutch her apron, her gaze darting between Evelyn and Mason. She feels the heat of every eye in the diner, burning with judgment. Mason clears his throat, his voice cracking slightly. Ma'am, we're sorry. Clearly, this was a misunderstanding. Evelyn slowly lowers the photograph, her expression stony. A misunderstanding, she echoes. Her voice is calm, but there's steel beneath it. Tell me, would you have misunderstood if I looked like the regulars you serve every morning? Or was it the bag? Or maybe it's just me. Officer Bradley steps forward cautiously. Look, ma'am, no one's accusing you of anything. We're here to ensure. To ensure what? Evelyn interrupts, her voice sharp now. That someone like me doesn't make the wrong kind of noise in your quiet little diner? A murmur ripples through the room. The patrons, once indifferent, now look at Evelyn with a mix of curiosity, shame, and discomfort. Margaret swallows hard, her chest tightening. Mason tries to regain control of the narrative. Look, we had an incident last month. A false alarm, sure, but it rattled everyone. We were just being cautious. Evelyn fixes him with a glare so piercing that he flinches. Caution without thought is cowardice, she says, each word landing like a hammer. The tense silence is broken by a slow, deliberate sound, someone rising from a corner booth. It's an older man, his face lined with experience and his shoulders squared with dignity. His sharp eyes hold recognition as they land on Evelyn. Evelyn? He says, his voice strong yet tinged with surprise. Evelyn turns, her expression guarded at first. When she sees him, a flicker of familiarity breaks through her composure. Colonel Harris? The man nods, stepping forward. The room watches as he approaches, his presence commanding. I thought I recognized you, he says, his voice softening with emotion. The last time I saw you, you were dragging me out of a firefight in Kandahar. And now, this? He turns, his gaze sweeping across the room. "This woman," he says, raising his voice so everyone can hear, "is a hero. She's risked everything for this country. And you're treating her like a threat?" The room seems to shrink under his words. Margaret looks down, tears welling in her eyes. Mason shifts uncomfortably, his clipboard now a useless weight in his hand. Even the officers appear chastened. Colonel Harris continues, his tone growing sharper. "This isn't just a mistake, it's a failure, of trust, of respect, of everything we claim to value." Evelyn's lips part as if to speak, but instead she lowers her gaze, momentarily overwhelmed by the colonel's unexpected defense. She wasn't prepared for this. The memory of that firefight, the loss they both endured, rushes back like a wave crashing against her composure. "You don't have to do this," she murmurs, her voice barely audible. Colonel Harris shakes his head. "I do. You deserve better than this, and so does every other veteran who's walked into this country's broken promises." His words ripple through the diner like an earthquake. Patrons shift in their seats, some pulling out their phones. The tension breaks as whispers turn to a low buzz. One customer quietly begins recording the interaction, ensuring the story won't stay confined to this room. Margaret steps forward, her voice trembling. I didn't mean," but she falters, the weight of her actions choking her words. She looks at Evelyn, pleading silently for forgiveness. Evelyn meets her gaze but says nothing. The next morning, Evelyn's phone buzzes incessantly. Texts, missed calls, and notifications pile up. She groans, reluctantly pulling the phone to her face. "Social media is alight with clips from the diner. Veteran confronted over bag," the headlines read. Some posts are sympathetic, hailing Evelyn as a symbol of perseverance. Others are vitriolic, accusing her of overreacting or worse. Evelyn sighs deeply, tossing the phone aside. The noise feels suffocating. She sits at the edge of her bed, staring at the framed photograph she retrieved from her suitcase the night before. The faces in it, her comrades, her family, seem to stare back, as if asking, "What now?" At the diner, Margaret nervously watches Mason address the staff during their morning meeting. "We're in the middle of a PR nightmare," Mason growls, slamming his clipboard on the counter. "And it's all because someone didn't think before acting." Margaret flinches, guilt eating away at her. She knows Mason is talking about her, even though he doesn't say it outright. Her co-workers avoid her gaze, their silence deafening. That night, Margaret sits alone in her small apartment, scrolling through the hateful comments flooding the diner's social media pages. Her own face appears in one of the viral clips. "She's the one who questioned the veteran," the caption reads. Tears stream down her cheeks as she realizes the depth of her mistake. A week later, Evelyn reluctantly agrees to an interview with a local news station. Sitting in the Stark studio, bright lights bearing down on her, she shifts uncomfortably. The anchor, a polished woman with a sympathetic smile, begins gently. "Evelyn, your story has struck a nerve. What do you want people to take away from this?" Evelyn exhales, her gaze steady. "This isn't just about me," she says. "It's about how we treat people. Veterans, yes, but also anyone who doesn't fit into a neat little box. Prejudice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet assumption, a moment of doubt. But those moments add up." The anchor nods. "What do you hope happens next?" Evelyn hesitates. "Change doesn't come from apologies. It comes from action." The Sunrise Diner is unrecognizable. Gone is the cozy anonymity of its regular crowd. In its place is a parade of reporters, protesters, and supporters. Cameras flash outside the diner as news crews jostle for space. A large hand-drawn sign taped to the diner's window reads, "Veterans deserve respect." Another smaller sign hangs beneath it, "Closed for renovations." Inside, Mason leans against the counter, a hollow look in his eyes. The fallout from the incident has spiraled beyond his control. Online, the diner's reputation is in shreds, reviews flooding in with one-star ratings and scathing comments. Customers have stopped coming, and employees are quitting under the pressure. Margaret sits at a corner booth, head bowed. She's avoided eye contact with Mason for days. Her guilt feels insurmountable, but she can't bring herself to leave. Not yet. "Do you think this will blow over?" she finally asks, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason doesn't answer immediately. When he does, his tone is cold. "Blow over? This isn't a storm, Margaret. It's a reckoning. If you're interested, don't forget to subscribe and like it." Evelyn sits in her modest apartment, staring at her laptop. Emails flood her inbox, most from strangers. Some are veterans thanking her for standing up, sharing their own stories of prejudice. Others are hate-filled screeds accusing her of seeking attention or sowing division. She reads one message from a fellow veteran. Subject: "Thank you, dear Evelyn. I saw the video from the diner, and I wanted to say thank you. I've been in your shoes, treated like an outsider in the country I fought to protect. Your strength reminded me that we deserve better. If you ever need support, reach out. We've got your six." Evelyn's eyes sting with tears. She shuts the laptop abruptly, the weight of it all pressing down on her. The fight she never asked for is now hers to carry. Margaret can't sleep. Night after night, she replays the moment she questioned Evelyn, wishing she could take it back. Finally, unable to bear the guilt any longer, she decides to act. Early one morning, Margaret arrives at Evelyn's apartment building. She stands nervously in the hallway, holding a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. When Evelyn opens the door, her expression hardens instantly. "What do you want?" Evelyn asks. Margaret shifts awkwardly, clutching the box tighter. "I came to apologize. Properly." Evelyn crosses her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Go on." Margaret exhales shakily. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have questioned you or made assumptions. It wasn't fair. And it wasn't right. Her voice breaks. "I've been thinking about it every day, and I needed you to know." She holds out the box. "I brought you something. It's not much, but..." Evelyn hesitates before taking the box. Inside is a simple leather-bound journal and a pen, wrapped in tissue paper. Margaret stammers, "I thought maybe you could use it. To write, or, I don't know, to share your story." Evelyn studies her carefully. "You think this erases what you did?" Margaret shakes her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, but I'm trying. I want to be better." Evelyn looks at the journal, then back at Margaret. After a long pause, she says quietly, "It's a start." The next week, Evelyn agrees to a second interview, this time with a larger news outlet. The anchor, a sharp-eyed journalist named Alex Rivera, presses harder than the first interviewer. "Evelyn, your story has sparked a national conversation," Alex says. "Some see you as a hero. Others accuse you of blowing the incident out of proportion. What's your response to the criticism?" Evelyn's jaw tightens. Criticism comes with speaking the truth. People don't like having their assumptions challenged. But this isn't just about me. It's about every veteran who's been overlooked, every person who's been judged unfairly. Alex nods. "You've become a symbol of resilience and justice. Do you plan to continue advocating for these issues?" Evelyn hesitates, then says, "I didn't ask to be a symbol. But if my story helps someone else find their voice, then maybe it's worth it." Mason sits alone in the diner after hours, the once bustling room eerily silent. The financial strain is unbearable, lost customers, mounting debts, and the looming threat of closure. He stares at his reflection in the stainless steel of the coffee machine, questioning everything. That night, he drafts an email to Evelyn, subject, an apology. "Dear Evelyn, I've thought a lot about what happened. There's no excuse for how I handled things that day. I failed as a manager and as a person. I want to make things right, not just for you but for everyone who's been let down by this place. If you're willing, I'd like to meet and hear your thoughts on how we can do better." He hesitates before hitting send. When the message finally disappears into cyberspace, Mason leans back in his chair, feeling the weight of vulnerability for the first time in years. Evelyn reads Mason's email the next morning. Her first instinct is to delete it. Why should she give him the time of day? But something stops her. Against her better judgment, she replies. Later that week, they meet at a neutral location, a quiet park bench overlooking the river. Mason fidgets nervously as Evelyn approaches, her expression unreadable. "I didn't think you'd come," Mason admits. Evelyn sits, folding her hands in her lap. "I almost didn't." Mason exhales deeply. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to fix this somehow." Evelyn studies him for a long moment. "If you're serious about change, start by listening, not just to me, but to your staff, your customers, your community. Change doesn't come from apologies. It comes from action." Mason nods solemnly. "I'll do whatever it takes." Months later, the Sunrise Diner reopens with a new mission. A banner hangs above the door, a place for everyone. Inside, a plaque honors veterans, and a portion of the diner's profits now goes to a local veteran support organization. Margaret, now more confident and compassionate, greets customers warmly. her apron proudly displaying a small pin in the shape of an olive branch. Evelyn watches from across the street, her suitcase at her feet once again. She doesn't enter the diner, but for the first time in months, she feels a flicker of hope. The world isn't perfect, but maybe, just maybe, it can be better. Evelyn's story gains traction nationwide. She begins receiving invitations to speak at events and rallies, but her reluctance grows with each request. She wants to leave the incident behind, not become the face of a movement. Yet, the calls keep coming. At her apartment, Evelyn stares at an email on her laptop. Subject, Advocacy Summit Invitation. Dear Miss Reid, your courage and perseverance have inspired countless individuals. We would be honored if you could speak at the National Advocacy Summit next month. Your voice could bring hope and change to many. Evelyn sighs, running a hand through her hair. She closes the laptop without replying. The thought of standing in front of a crowd, bearing her soul, feels insurmountable. Her phone buzzes. It's a text from Colonel Harris. Don't let them silence you. Call me. Evelyn stares at the message. Silence isn't the issue, she thinks. It's the weight of speaking. If you're interested, don't forget to subscribe and like it. At the diner, Margaret notices a new customer, a man in a crisp suit, seated near the counter. His demeanor is cold, his eyes scanning the room with calculated precision. Margaret approaches him with a smile, but before she can speak, he holds up a hand. You're Margaret Delaney, right? He asks, his tone clipped. Margaret nods, taken aback. Yes. Can I help you? The man places a business card on the counter. I represent Easton and Mills. We're a PR firm specializing in damage control. Your situation, this diner situation, has become a PR disaster. Margaret frowns, glancing at the card. We don't need a PR firm. We're handling it. The man smirks. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, your little apology tour isn't going to cut it. This place is bleeding customers. You need a professional narrative. Mason approaches, overhearing the exchange. Who are you? He demands. The man extends a hand, which Mason doesn't take. David Easton, I'm here to help you save your business. Mason hesitates. Margaret looks between them, her unease growing. We're not interested, she says firmly. But Mason's expression falters. We'll think about it, Mason says. Despite her reservations, Evelyn agrees to speak at a local veterans advocacy event. The room is small, the crowd intimate, but Evelyn's nerves are relentless. She stands at the podium, gripping its edges. My name is Evelyn Reid, she begins, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. I served this country for 10 years. I've seen the best and worst of humanity. And yet, when I came home, I was treated like a stranger. She pauses, scanning the audience. Faces filled with quiet empathy meet her gaze. This isn't just about me. It's about every veteran who comes home to find the country they fought for doesn't see them. It's about every person judged unfairly because of how they look or what they carry. Her voice grows stronger. Change doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens when we stand together and demand better. The crowd erupts into applause. Evelyn steps back from the podium, her hands trembling, but there's a flicker of something new, pride. Meanwhile, Mason reluctantly agrees to a meeting with David Easton. They sit in the diner after hours, the lights dimmed. Easton lays out a plan, rebranding, targeted ads, and a carefully curated narrative that reframes the incident as a misunderstanding. You can control the story, Easton says, leaning forward. People forget quickly if you give them a shiny new headline. Margaret, seated nearby, listens in silence, her fists clench under the table. This isn't about headlines, she finally says. It's about doing what's right. Easton smirks. What's right doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart. Mason looks conflicted. Margaret stands abruptly. If you go through with this, you're erasing everything we've worked for. I won't be part of it. She storms out, leaving Mason and Easton in tense silence. Margaret finds herself on Evelyn's doorstep that evening, her face flushed with anger and determination. Evelyn answers, surprised to see her. Margaret? Evelyn asks, stepping aside to let her in. Margaret paces the small living room, words spilling out. There's this PR guy trying to spin the diner story. He's convincing Mason to bury everything, to pretend it never happened. Evelyn folds her arms. And you came to me because... Margaret stops pacing, meeting Evelyn's gaze. Because you're right. Change doesn't come from apologies. It comes from action, and I'm ready to act. Evelyn studies her for a moment. Then she nods. Let's make sure they can't bury this. The next day, Evelyn and Margaret team up with a local veterans organization. They launch a campaign to highlight not just Evelyn's story, but the broader issues veterans face. The campaign spreads quickly, with testimonials from veterans across the country. The pressure mounts on Mason and the diner. Customers begin demanding accountability, not spin. Mason finds himself cornered, forced to choose between Easton's slick promises and the community's growing demands for real change. Mason finally addresses the community during a town hall meeting organized by Evelyn and the veterans group. Standing at the podium, he looks out at the crowd, his hands trembling. "I made a mistake," he begins. Not just that day in the diner, but every day since then, trying to cover it up instead of owning it. "I let fear guide my actions, and I failed to listen. But today, I'm here to say I'm sorry, and to promise that this diner will be a place where everyone feels welcome." The crowd applauds, but Mason doesn't stop there. "We're committing to hiring veterans, supporting local organizations, and making this place more than just a business. It's going to be a symbol of what we can achieve when we work together." Evelyn watches from the back of the room, her expression unreadable. When the applause dies down, she nods slightly, a small but meaningful gesture. Months later, the Sunrise Diner has transformed. Its walls are adorned with photos of veterans, and its menu features dishes named after local heroes. Margaret now manages outreach programs, ensuring the diner remains connected to the community. Evelyn, meanwhile, has embraced her role as an advocate. She speaks at events, works with organizations, and writes about her experiences. Her once-worn suitcase now sits in her closet, a reminder of where she's been and how far she's come. The city of Portland hums with life, but now there's a sense of hope, a belief that change, though slow and difficult, is possible. If you found this interesting, be sure to subscribe to the channel and listen to the full story. And if you've seen or experienced something similar,